Well, good afternoon, everybody. Almost afternoon. Appreciate you being here. I'm Pete Festerson, the president of the Washington Council. I'm also the president of the Council of Officials. So I'll be your host and sort of MC today for today's meeting. We're pleased to host the meeting here in Omaha today, literally just blocks from the MAPA office. You always enjoy being down here this time of year as well, during March Madness. So this year we aren't hosting any first or second round games for March Madness across the street here, unfortunately. But this is a really fun place to be during those times and during any of the games. And then, of course, about to come back, if you have not experienced the College Series right here too. The Masters Factory is a great place to do that as well. It's always a lot of fun. So hopefully we'll see you here during those events. All right, as I start the meeting here, I need to read the Open Meetings Act. This meeting of the Metropolitan Area Planning Agency Council of Officials will be conducted in compliance with the Nebraska statutes of the Open Meetings Act. For reference, a copy of the Open Meetings Act is available with the recording secretary, Elizabeth Zeller. For action items, if you're unsure whether or not you are supposed to vote on action items, you can see indication on your name card. But I will also say today, we're small and mighty, and we do not have a quorum, so we will not be voting on items today. So that part of the agenda will go pretty quick. Having said that, why don't we start with introductions, and we'll just start with Mike right here at the first stage. Mike, Rusty, here's Walker and Doc. Part of the Ubership Association. Right here, bench. Works starts in the city affiliate. Found the city of this. Bench. Here we go, city administrator. Proceed, so we Jeff Fire, Bill, city clerk. Eric Connor, city of Omaha. Mark Spotson, city of Omaha. Maddox, WC. These sections, city of Omaha mayor's office.
Or I'm at MAPA.
Oh, it's MAPA. All right. Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you all being here. That's really, I think, the most important part of these meetings, I think, is that we're all together and all talking about our common areas of interest and building those relationships. So as indicated, we do not have a quorum today, so we're just going to skip over approval of the minutes. We'll do that at a future meeting. So we'll go ahead and jump right in and start with the executive director's report.
Very much, Pete. Thank you again to all of you who chose to show up today. Hopefully the program will be interesting to you. I'm going to start with just a few remarks about where MAPA has been working over the last couple of months since our last meeting in December. So MAPA, one of our national associations is NARC, the National Association of Regional Councils. We have a national conference of regions in Washington, D.C. every year that serves really as our policy conference. Normally, we're out there hearing from leaders from the administration about housing and economic development, rural development, USDA, all these other programs. And this year was a little bit different just with all of the changes that are happening in the federal government. We heard from from a lot of different advocacy groups, a lot of different lobbyists, a lot of different people who are working on the Hill, Senate staffers and things that are working in the committees on issues that impact us. So we've got a great update on sort of where the Senate is looking to update things on the infrastructure bill or for House staffers on transportation and infrastructure. And we've got a readout on some other things that are just happening within the federal apparatus that we want to keep our eyes on. We traveled with a number of representatives from Potawatomi County, from Mills County, and Douglas County, and really did those legislative visits as well, talking about MAPA's priorities and infrastructure planning, talking about the work that we do in economic development as an economic development district and our partnership with the Greater Omaha Chamber of Commerce, in addition to the really important role that HUD dollars play in serving as that kind of local and federal partnership on housing and urban development projects throughout the community. So it was a great conference. It was very kind of whirlwind, snowed in Washington, D.C., which I've never been there for. And it shut the city down, which was kind of interesting. MAPA was fortunate to receive the Planning Excellence Award from the Nebraska Association of Planners, or American Planning Association, Nebraska chapter. And this is for our Western Sarpy County Transportation Enhancement Program project. This is a project that was through MAPA's mini grant program for our communities. It was initially awarded to the city of Gretna to really kind of do this within their extraterritorial jurisdiction. And ultimately, we brought along the city of Papillion, city of Springfield, Sarpy County, to really look at kind of the growth in Western Sarpy County and how the transportation system can support that, and creating a plan that at its core not just really focuses on supporting that growth, but also has systemic safety built into it with a number of different strategies from roundabouts and other things to keep the safe speed manageable and make sure that we're reducing the number of fatal and serious injury crashes. So tremendously proud of the team. Jim's not here today, nor is Carlos and Lindsay and Court, but they did a tremendous job leading this in coordination with our partners. And so really a celebration not just of our award, but really a celebration with the local communities that helped us get across the finish line. So I referenced those HUD dollars. Those are really important, not just in sort of large urban communities and the entitlement communities, but some of our smallest communities as well. And so the city of Alva and Cass County recently received an award for a streetscape project along their main street there, as did the city of Minden for a housing project, kind of in recovery from the tornado of last Arbor Day. And so that was working closely with a number of partners on those. For Minden, it's Habitat for Humanity Council Bluffs is actually going to work as the sort of developer of that and create 3 duplexes, 6 units to kind of really provide some of the housing that had been destroyed through that tornado. So tremendously exciting, huge, important projects for those communities. So you hear us talk a lot about systemic safety. Safe Streets for All is an award that we received from the U.S. Department of Transportation, a $750,000 grant to create what's called a comprehensive safety action plan. Our board has released that plan to the public, so you can go to the MAPA website and you can see all of the strategies, all of the projects, all of the things that are been prioritized through this process. And we've been holding a number of open houses that, in spite of weather, have moved forward. But it's a tremendous, I think, really recognition of how we as an MPO can really kind of set the stage for systemic safety at the local level, work really closely with local leaders, local planning and engineering and law enforcement side to understand how to make our streets safer. So we continue to be tremendously excited about this project. I think it's a great regional planning effort and a lot of great recommendations there. Please take a look at that plan if you haven't already. Thanks to all of you who have participated in those stakeholder meetings, those breakouts, the safety committee, or in our public meetings, because it's been a really great time for people around the table. Another sort of marker for us here, really following the general election here in the fall, we typically do a couple of trainings around issues that might be new to people who have been newly elected or appointed boards, whether it's the Parks Board or whatever the case may be, Library Board. And we had a great turnout for our Nebraska session. We had 22 people show up and really kind of sit through a meeting that was a little bit of a new concept for us. We took kind of an open meetings act training that we had been doing that took 3 hours on its own, and really kind of split it in half and get more about really running effective meetings. What do you do as a board member? How do you advocate for yourself? How do you advocate for your priorities? How do you make sure that you use kind of the structure of those meetings, whether it's agendas and minutes and kind of that formal action to really feel empowered to serve in those roles? And we had great response. It's something that we're going to prize here later in the year as well. So if any of you are elected officials or appointed to boards, or you have boards and commissions where this is valuable, please let us know, because we want to get as is in front of as many people as possible to get that. That's a great response. The Iowa one got canceled because of the snow. We rescheduled it, and then it got canceled because of the snow again. So that is our first training there. But we did shift it to virtual, and we'll do this one again as well. We have our partners from the Nebraska Extension Office and Iowa State Extension Office who delivered a lot of that training, which is really, I think, a great model. I won't touch on all of these things, but I put this community assistance report in here the last couple of meetings just to give you a sense of some of the larger and smaller conversations that we're having. We're supporting conversations about downtown revitalization, about healthy foods and active living. We're working closely with folks on code enforcement and also really kind of supporting all the economic development work around the region as well. A number of different things as well, supporting strategic planning and community prioritization, how we work alongside those community leaders to get to those 3 or 5 projects that we know they want to work on, that they're committed to over the next few years, so that we can start to grant all their students as well. And so that is the kind of the wrap up of my executive director report, kind of looking back over the last couple of months since our last meeting. This is also our meeting in March where we start to talk about the results of our member survey and where we're looking for the year ahead. So I've got a couple of slides here on our work program priorities. So our member survey, it's a little valuable. We've changed it a little bit year over year to try to drive as much interest as we can. And here are some of the topics that we asked about. And we really kind of center that survey on where do you want MAPA at the table in the year ahead? What are the challenges that you're anticipating facing in the year ahead? Are there projects that you're working on where you think MAPA or our team might be able to help get those things funding, or even just be a partner to kind of think about how you might approach them? In addition to a lot of focus on sort of joint purchasing, shared services, and kind of those professional development and training opportunities, just kind of affirm some places that we've been having conversations with our members over the last several years. So we got about 20 responses this year, which is really about average. Last year we had 27. This year we're back down to 20, which is then sort of our average. But this is really important to us in a lot of ways because it does affirm, in many ways, the things that we have been working on and we continue to see a lot of value in. Here's a brief summary. I won't go into all of this. The thing I'll draw your attention to first and foremost, though, is that 79% of people ask us for more peer exchange opportunities, whether it's included to this kind of a formal forum with council officials, or maybe even some more things just around specific issue areas, specific items. Many of you on the Nebraska side might remember the small cell legislation that came together maybe about 5 years ago now, and we had some working groups that really kind of get people around the table thinking about, how do we approach this as planners or city administrators or public works officials. Really more opportunity and interest in that, which is something that we're going to definitely lean into. Transportation and mobility was a huge priority for most of the things we've heard. Infrastructure and development, how do those projects kind of unlock new development, address unmet needs within communities. Housing planning, this is again, last couple of years, this is an area that MAPA is really looking at. Where do we fit into this whole ecosystem of housing partners? We have, again, that CDG experience. We have the MAPA Foundation, which is a nonprofit development organization. How do we put those pieces together in a way that supports our members? And then parks and public spaces as well. Really a lot of focus on placemaking, on trails and other things that can really deliver the high quality of life that people have been asking for at the local level and the regional level. Then economic development was prioritized by 2 communities, really on that focus of really small business revitalization, and how do we empower those main streets to thrive in the midst of all of the other economic things that are going on regionally. So when we talk about our work program, this is really kind of the statement of work for MAPA. We internally have a strategic plan that's really focused on how do MAPA staff orient ourselves to our mission statement. What is our core really ask us and empower us to do as staff? And see those items there on the left-hand side of the screen. And our work program is really an expression of that through the lens of what we hope is our members through these kind of issue areas and priorities. So when we start to look ahead to the FY26, obviously, community and economic development, that kind of core council of government's focus is really going to be front and center for MAPA. A lot of strategic planning, a lot of technical assistance on projects. We administer a number of funds, whether that's the revolving loan fund in partnership with the Nebraska Enterprise Fund, or whether it's the Potawatomi County Housing Trust Fund, all the way down to just kind of that general grant writing assistance. Regional transportation planning, taking our safety planning to the next level, really getting into the implementation of many of those strategies that have been identified in the regional plan, in addition to the City of Omaha's Vision Zero plan, and really trying to do that partner to together on systemic safety. That's a really big priority. MAPA has identified a regional freight plan as a priority as well, and we were awarded funding by the region last year to accomplish that. So that will be moving forward here in the next year as well. In addition to this overall focus on complete streets, really putting this land use and transportation context more formally into place. And think back to that example I gave with VSTEP, where we're thinking about the growth, thinking about infrastructure, how do we support those things in tandem and make those decisions along the way. How can we be really kind of supportive of that at the local level and really help inform policy where we can make it. And then leadership and data resources, MAPA is the name. We do a lot of it, and we do a lot of data organizing. We are so fortunate to have had a number of people join our team over the last 6 months to a year that have allowed us to take very different avenues and entry points into data. We were awarded funds by very generous Front Porch Investments to do a regional housing market evaluation or housing market analysis, which is underway right now. And I think that tool is going to have a long-lasting effect in how MAPA can show up and really support this conversation about housing, land use, and development, and really where we can prioritize both on policy and on the project side. In addition to just really focusing on coordinating geographic resources at the regional level, we have a great partnerships with our county GIS departments and really trying to make those data sets interface both at the county level and at the state level is a big task for us. And then again, back to just that regional collaboration and convening communities. That's what this looks like here in this room. That's what it looks like when we get people from various communities, large and small, from as small as Murray down to all the way up to City on the Parks Board for a larger community. We have done a number of different trainings over the last few years as well that have brought sort of national leaders to the table, whether that's through state systems. We hosted a meeting just down the road here at the National Park Service back in August that was about the state systems approach, and brought FHWA and other regional partners from NGOs to think about how do we sort of have a foothold and help lead this conversation for peer organizations. In addition to some of these ongoing regional, we call them planning collaboratives, but they're really roundtables of community leaders, much like this with real specific geographic areas. So think about Western Douglas County one, that's Douglas County, Valley, Waterloo, and Bennington, thinking about some of the unique concerns that those communities have, really focused on trail development, focused on housing development, really focused through that lens of just recovering from the 2019 floods and the impacts in those communities, to the Mills Cast Planning Collaborative, which is a bi-state effort really to think about how do these two rural counties on the edge of a larger metropolitan area work. We're supporting that with a USDA grant for rural business development, bringing a partner called Retail Strategies that can talk about some of those small town Main Street economic development activities and how do we think about those as public officials and other organizations like Chambers of Commerce as well. And then at the bottom, really kind of just the through line of a lot of our work over the last 10 years has been disaster recovery, really finding and owning our role in that kind of response and recovery process, and better articulating that to our members and supporting the communities when they do that. And that's really something that we see to thread through the federal resources that we get, but it's also something that we know we have to plan for to be responsive in that moment. So that is it. And I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. A lot actually. We'll speak more about this as we get to our budget in June, and I hope you join us for that meeting so I can see all this together.
Well, thanks, Mike, for that report and for all that work. We appreciate your efforts and efforts of the entire MAPA staff in all those areas. Next item on the agenda is to introduce our featured speaker. We have them remotely today, I understand, so I'll give the introduction here and then I think we'll have them plugged in by Zoom. So our featured speaker is Ross Van Dongen. Ross leads Accelerator for America's Infrastructure and Workforce Development Initiatives, as well as directing the organization's governmental affairs. In his role, Ross tracks federal infrastructure opportunities for local, regional, and state governments, especially pertaining to advancing underserved communities, economic mobility, and interconnectivity. Ross works closely with federal agencies to increase communication with mayors, local leaders, and their teams, people like us, to ensure a more productive dialogue across all layers of government. Ross also has the honor to lead a 12-year-old infrastructure advocacy coalition called United for Infrastructure. Ross received his bachelor's degree from Indiana University of Bloomington, and he lives in the greater Washington, D.C. area with his wife, Gabby, and our new daughter, Martha. So please join me in welcoming Ross Van Dam.
Buddy, thanks very much for that kind introduction. I really appreciate it. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. Perfect. It's such an honor to be with everyone today. I know it might not be the exact thing you want to do during your lunch hour. Listen to a floating head talk on the wall, a couple floating heads talk on the wall. So we'll try and keep this brief, try and keep it vaguely entertaining for you and get you back to your regular scheduled programming. But again, I'm really thrilled to be here with everybody. Accelerator for America, who I'll tell a little bit more about in a minute, has been honored to work with MAPA the last couple of years through U.S. Department of Transportation's Thriving Communities program, have developed a really great dialogue and working relationship, and got to know the beautiful communities that are at part of this bi-state authority, and all the different types of communities you serve, and really great to get to know Mike and the team a bit more. So thanks for having my colleague AJ and I, who we get to hear from a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get right into it. All right, so we're here to talk about the thing that everybody loves to talk about. The word that is being thrown around all the time these days is the uncertainty factor. So talking a little bit about the federal landscape, how that has shifted from the previous administration into the current one, and how that impacts you at home as far as your transportation infrastructure planning, what it means for some of those beautiful grants and projects that Mike outlined in his presentation, and what it might mean for ones you still have in the queue, or things you're thinking about both in Nebraska, in Iowa, as a regional body moving forward. But first and foremost, who are we? Why were we chosen to come speak to you a little bit today? As I mentioned, we are part of a nonprofit, AJ and I, called Accelerator for America. We're a 501c3 nonprofit that was founded by the former mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, back in 2017, to really work across local government systems, a network of mayors nationally, to ideate solutions to economic development and scale and replicate those in communities across the country. This was spurred on by the mayor's successful passage of a transportation ballot measure in Los Angeles that helped to grow and expand the LA public transportation network. And in lieu of an abundance of federal funds, mayors saw what Mayor Garcetti did and said, hey, we want to do something like that too. And that really started a brain churning rather, on how can we develop capital stacks with the networks we have locally, with our local philanthropic partners, with our local corporate partners, other regions near us, to really get together and create projects and create investments that are going to keep us going on into the future, that bring more people into our networks, our systems, and our infrastructure to lift them up along the way. So what we're going to talk about today is really understanding the priorities that this administration has laid out for us, and again, what that is going to mean for you in your own individual planning efforts across MAPA and in your individual communities. So what we've done is taken a kind of collective approach to gathering data, research, and insights from the campaign period of 2024 through the transition and into the current administration now, looking at all the memos, executive orders that have come out, as well as statements and verbiage that we're starting to get from federal agencies. They continue to staff up to understand the priorities and how the campaign is going to turn into the governance. So here's a few things that we're probably all pretty familiar with at this point in time, and we'll get a little bit deeper into a certain few of them. But really, we're going to shift into focusing on market-driven investments. So what is the market doing, and how can we capitalize on those market movements to influence our transportation investments, influence our infrastructure investments? And then also going from a period of heavy local control back to a period of more state-driven authority, and then removing some of those regulatory elements that this administration believes are really hindering development or slowing processes down. Also focusing back on away from transit systems and transit operations, more into that highway development. So really refocusing on roadways, highway infrastructure, car-centric infrastructure, and then also kind of moving away from that electric vehicle focus that a lot of the programming from the previous administration really centered in on across different federal agencies. Also bringing the private sector back into this in a big way, making sure that private capital, private financing is a key piece of all legislation programming moving forward. I mentioned deregulation already. I mentioned, but this is focusing really on emerging technologies. So letting innovators innovate without necessarily hindering them with bureaucratic red tape or data collection, that sort of thing. And then moving, this is goes back to that state autonomy, but moving away from this abundance of discretionary programming and focusing more on formula funds, user fee-based models to fund overall infrastructure investments. So let's talk about a few of those in particular. So again, shifting away from the federal level to more state developed formula programs that then trickle down into the locals. So rather working on a national discretionary basis, how can we create programs that you're going to compete just within your own state and let that state guide how those discretionary programs look? And then also just they view this as the central hub through USDOT, through USDOE, EPA, et cetera, that created a lot of backlog. So how can they deregulate and diversify where those different programmatic streams are coming from to speed things up? The market-driven piece. Again, I talked about public-private partnerships, private investment, private financing. There's a whole office at USDOT called the Build America Bureau. This is really the kind of P3 private financing engine of USDOT. So really focusing on the programs that are inherent in that office. The loan programs, TIFIA, RIF, WIFIA, some of you might have heard of those, but really seeing how can we get back to kind of this loan-based programming rather than heavy grant funding. And then here, again, removing some of those rules, regulatory hurdles as they view them, and other policy structures they think allowed bureaucracy to get in the way of development. So really removing those, clearing them out by any means necessary to ensure that projects are moving forward, that money is flowing more easily. And then they're creating those reforms, again, by any means necessary to make that happen. So we're going to get into some of those executive orders that call for that and the timeline of all that and how it's now moving into actual policy or development of government structures. I'll skip over this. One thing I want to focus in on this slide, though, is the Vision Zero portion. Especially as it pertains to how y'all are thinking about your Safe Streets for All grant, the complete streets aspects. There is going to be opposition or shift away from some of those Vision Zero focuses that have guided so many Safe Streets for All development plans. Some of you might have heard about those Vision Zero communities, gone through the steps to become a certified Vision Zero community. That's going to be, there's opposition to some of those policies in this administration. So really thinking about how else can we make our streets and roads safer without necessarily slowing folks down going through central corridors or those elements, those quick build elements that they think might have impeded freight, impeded folks from moving rapidly from their destination to the location. And then the transit subsidies within the Highway Trust Fund as well, trying to continue shoring up the Highway Trust Fund without minimizing some of those expenses out to transit focuses, which is, again, not going to be a key focus of this administration. We talked about the EVs, and some of that theory of the case comes that the market is not quite there yet. So let's speak to the market that we actually have versus the one that you want there to be within the previous administration lens. And then also they're citing some national security concerns with our reliance upon China and their critical minerals to develop those EV batteries and to create that market within the United States. The last thing I'll say here is on automated vehicles, on that innovation, allowing these automators, these innovators to proliferate, to scale without some of the federal structures that might impede that scaling or that progress. That's what they believe they need to do. Okay, so that was kind of the high level overview of priorities that we've come to understand from this administration, what they hope that their policies can actually achieve. So now we're going to follow just to how we got there, the executive action activity. There's been a flurry of things. There's a lot of speculation all the time on what some of those executive orders actually mean, what it could mean down the road. Basically, I just want to say from the top, from January 20th, when the president was inaugurated, to close to now, just so you can see exactly what had happened and how this had, and the timeline of things that had led to so much people talking about the uncertainty, talking about the confusion, et cetera. So obviously, the President Trump is inaugurated on January 20th. That same day, he issues a ton of executive orders. 5 of them that are pretty critical to the transportation elements, to some of the federal programming elements inherent in the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, that has allowed some of these discretionary opportunities to flow. Unleashing American energy, that's very focused on recommitting to some of the fossil fuel or traditional fuel energy vehicles rather than the green energy or sustainable renewable vehicles. Ending radical and wasteful DEI programs and spending. So all of this is focused on deprioritizing that diversity, equity, and inclusion elements across all agencies, across all programming. Putting America first in international environmental agreements. That is some of that tariff language, the trade stuff that's going on right now. Protecting the American people against invasion. This is the immigration aspects, the border protection aspects, and then obviously the establishment of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, which has had obviously a very large footprint over the first few weeks of this administration, which we'll touch on a little bit. 1 week to the day after the inauguration, that original Office of Management and Budget memo goes out, directing federal agencies to pause the spending, which unleashed a fury of people asking, what does this mean for us? What does this mean for our grants? What do we need to do? What programs are going to be impacted? And led to immediately the next day, OMB clarifying some of the programs that will be exempt, and then a flurry of action to actually move through the legal processes to stop that pause. A group of elected officials, I think it was 22 or 23 Democratic attorney generals, did file suit to pause that freeze, which a U.S. district judge temporarily did halt until February 3rd. On that same day, Sean Duffy was confirmed as the Secretary of Transportation. So a really fun day for the new DOT Secretary to come on board amidst all this executive action moving through DC and then out into the national media landscape. On the 29th, so 2 days later, OMB rescinded that original January 27th memo. But at the same time, the White House press secretary said that just the memo was rescinded, not necessarily the intent of the memo. So we would still be pausing federal programs, but they were going to re-clarify or further clarify, rather, the language that would be used to how that pause would go. And that's on that same day, a second district judge signals that he would block the federal funding freeze, despite the memo having been rescinded. January 31, that second judge actually does move on that and restrained federal funding freeze. On that same day, DOGE got control of the OPM and started using that OPM database as a way to message all federal employees. And this is the first instance of a email indicating that federal employees would have an opportunity to voluntarily resign from their positions to limit federal employees and spending for federal employees. And then DOGE claims it would be able to eliminate $1 billion in spending strictly on DEI programming. February 3rd, that district judge extended her freeze. The first district judge, I should say, extended her freeze. And this is the same day that Secretary Duffy released a memo outlining how his U.S. Department of Transportation would prioritize their programming. That was the memo that you might have seen that talked about prioritization for communities that have above average marriage and birth rates, focused on safety. Safety was a major cudgel of how he's going to guide all programming, and really centering in on the family being the absolute priority of all things that US DOT would be focused around. February 10th, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds says that she would establish her own DOGE task force. Obviously, Governor Reynolds has made a focus on eliminating spending or reducing the budget in the state of Iowa. So this is more so just a commitment to those efforts again. And that task force would be holding their first meeting within 2 months. On February 11th, then President Trump signs an EO giving DOGE authority to cut federal agency spending and staff. And then probationary employees, those employees with 1 year under their belt or less, are terminated across agencies. And the reason I'm bringing up some of the DOGE cuts is because it impacts how you, as possibly a project owner or as a grant applicant, might be communicating with the federal government. Some of those federal career employees might have been impacted by some of those layoffs, some of those freezes, some of those pauses, and they may not be able to say what it means for your grant, or they as they wait for the guidance, or their department might have been eliminated. They might have been part of that probationary freeze there. So all this stuff going on, what does it mean for Nebraska, Iowa, and the greater Omaha region? That's really the point of all this, right? Well, according to Pew Research data, Nebraska brought in just over $6 billion in revenues, federal fund revenues in fiscal year 22. So that's just under 40% of total revenues for the state. Iowa brought in $10.3 billion in revenues from that same year, a little bit less, about 34% of total state revenues. For Nebraska, however, your federal funds was about 12% more utilized for public welfare programs, and then 4% more than the average for infrastructure and utilities, using 8% of those revenues. And this graph to the right here shows how you Nebraska is the teal color, Iowa is the orange, and then the average state of all 50 states, the average of all 50 states is that blue. So you can see Nebraska using just over the average of 50 states, Iowa kind of just under, as far as your federal revenue share. Another graph here also from Pew shows just how the revenues are broken down. This is specifically for Nebraska. The pink being those federal funds, blue being state generated taxes, service charges, miscellaneous, and local funds. And you can see compared to the 50 state share there, the difference between Nebraska. So very similar, just under the revenues from taxes, just over the revenues from federal funds, just to show the breakdown of where your money is coming in from. One of the things that has been talked about quite a bit in Nebraska, I know, has been this one red grant from the EPA for the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. Massive grant, $307 million, aimed to reduce carbon emissions from farming. Lots of tools, equipment, that was slated to be purchased from that, was a huge program. And it caused a lot of disruption on whether or not the state could hold on to this, should put up a fight to keep that programming, or if they should just kind of let it go and look to fill that elsewhere. I saw many articles written about how internal state departments were, once that January 27th memo came out, really kind of going back and forth with each other across staff about what this meant, the impacts that would have, the uncertainty that came with that. However, the governor, Jim Pillen, has done a really good job of trying to quell concerns, keep people kind of level as he can, and reassure confidence that things are going to keep moving, things are going to keep happening. And that is what we are starting to see as dust begins to settle. Yes, there are major disruptions that are happening for individual grants, individual projects. However, the federal freeze that we're seeing is, for the most part, things are still moving along. We have to keep in mind, and I'm trying to keep in mind all the time, that these agencies are still really in the process of staffing up key positions, whether it be the very top, the secretary, the undersecretary, DepSec as well, and then all the teams that are associated with these programs. So we're trying to give folks grace to come on board, to have the secretary redefine programming as he sees fit, and then trickle that down to the staff that run these programs. So my major advice to you is programs that have been impacted, keep those communication channels and dialogues going, and really, really press on those representatives time and time again to get back to you, understanding that they will. We are seeing federal career staff coming awake all the time, sending emails out saying, I'm here, I will give you guidance as soon as I can. I can't speak to you about specific projects or grants right now, but the NOFA will be dropping at X time. So there are staff that are coming on board all the time, and we're seeing a little bit more assuredness that these programs will continue to keep moving. There's also a slew of notices of funding opportunity, or NOFOs as they call them, specific discretionary grants that are slated to still open in the spring, that the calendars have not been changed. And we are awaiting to see if those amendments or to the calendar will be made, but there's not been signaling as of yet, especially now that we have the CR, the budget CR, which I'll get to in a little bit, through to September, that there's going to be significant changes to the programming, or it's just going to be about how it is administered, which I will also get to in a moment. The difference maker for a lot of this is, if you do not have a grant agreement in place, what does that necessarily mean to you? If you're one of those folks, and I know that there's a couple projects within the MAPA region that were one of those last grant applications that was agreed to and awarded at the very tail end of the Biden-Harris administration that did not get to ink on paper with a grant agreement. That's I'm not going to lie, I'm not going to sugarcoat. That's a very rough place to be in. As these staff again begin to say a little bit more, I encourage everyone in this room that has one of those applications to really just keep the foot on the gas as trying to get information from those representatives at the federal agencies, as well as start to telegraph outside to your stakeholders and supporters what you need and what the project will do. I will talk more about that in a moment as well. Two programs that we have seen, these are the first NOFOs we've seen come on board, which is a really good sign. The Rural and Tribal Assistance Pilot Program and the Port Infrastructure Development Program both had NOFOs released or are very soon going to be released with specific guidance as to how they're going to be grading these programs. So that is a signal to us that things are moving along, moving through the pipeline, and that things will be solid. Another thing I want to mention here is many of you might have programs that you do have a grant agreement signed. You maybe even started work and you've invoiced and started to receive reimbursements until now. That is obviously not a situation that you want to be in with contractors that are trying to pay employees, with projects that need to be ordered. Again, I encourage you to really just document every single dollar that you're spending from your own pocket that is so far not going reimbursed, any pauses and what this process is overall costing you, and bring that up to your state delegation in Congress, in DC, and really make everyone around you part of that advocacy team to get up to the representatives in Congress to cause a stink and get them to try and press their partners in the executive branch to move. We'll get to that in a moment as well. So when is this all going to get sorted out, especially as it pertains to the language around the federal funding freeze? The short answer is we don't really know. With those district judges being involved now in court proceedings moving forward, this could take time. It's going to take time to move its way through the court program. Some of this might go all the way up to the Supreme Court, which could take who knows how long. So we need to prepare in the interim to keep things moving, and really just hold federal government's feet to the fire as far as getting answers directly from the agencies and departments themselves. We're also part of the federal budget reconciliation space, which is taking a lot of the energy of Washington, Capitol Hill. Your federal representatives have been focused on whether or not they're going to vote on the CR. The senators are in the process now, deliberating now and voting on that continued resolution today. And when it comes to infrastructure and transportation, a lot of legislators are already moving away from the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and focus on 2026 service transportation reauthorization. So they're already moving on to the next piece of legislation while the programming here today is still being implemented. So there's a lot happening in DC that we all need to kind of focus our representatives and senators on and tell them what you need now, here in the moment, versus next year, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, et cetera. I mentioned IIJA a lot. Again, that is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I also want to talk about the last surface transportation bill we had, which was the FAST Act, the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act. The reason I want to bring up some key differences between these two pieces of legislation is because the IIJA passed in November of 2021 authorized $1.2 trillion, largest infrastructure investment in the nation's history. $643 billion for those traditional surface transportation programs, but an additional $550 billion in new spending. It brought in water, it brought in broadband, it brought in all these things that had not traditionally been a part of a surface transportation bill. It also gave a tremendous amount of local control through those discretionary programs for the first time. The reason I'm bringing all this up is because Congress is signaling, because of the continuing resolution and budget process, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act reauthorization already moving through that budget reconciliation process as well, that there's going to be very limited political capital when they do get to the surface transportation reauthorization process. So they're signaling the FAST Act, $305 billion between 2016 to 2020, might be where they need to go to get the votes to pass something. And they're really going to follow the guidance of the administration and focus those dollars through the more traditional formula state programs, highway programs, limited transit programming and keep this much more in line with what the FAST Act did. So depending on what your transit agency's needs are, your individual local needs are, the project you have flowing, you might be wanting to also be reaching out to your state delegations, your senators, et cetera, to really talk about the IIJA spending levels and why we need to maintain spending at those levels to ensure programs that your projects are being funded by are still there in 2026 when this legislation is being considered. So I talked about how you need to bring everybody into your team when it comes to those individual projects that might be disrupted by the federal funding programs. I am not, I've never worked on the Hill. I've never worked for state legislator. My acronym game is very bad. So I apologize for the ACE component here. They all kind of mean the same thing, but the way I'm talking about them is slightly different. So be an ACE, advocate, communicate, and educate. Advocate, be a full-throated champion for the projects that you did get grant awards for or in the process of trying to get grant awards for. Bring your community along with you. Let them know how this is going to make their lives better, make the roads safer, make people get from point A to point B faster, and really what it might mean should these dollars not come down as far as how that impacts the improvements that you were trying to make for them. Communicate with your project partners, those stakeholders that you brought into these grant agreement processes, whether they were a sub-applicant or just someone who signed on and endorsed your project, let them know what's going on. And the point of those two areas, the advocacy and the communication, is to increase the amount of people in your repertoire who can communicate up to your representatives in Washington to let them know how this is impacting the district they represent or the state they represent. Elected representatives on the Hill are going to respond when it comes to financial impacts, job impacts to their district, and the consequences that might have as far as their electability. So I mentioned before, document, document, document. How much is this revenue? How much is this project going to generate in revenue for their district? How much is it costing you right now? Has it eliminated jobs or is it disrupting a job that a constituent of theirs has? This is stuff and data that you need to collect and communicate up to them so that they understand. Additionally, the elected representatives might not necessarily know if your project has been disrupted or that the project that was funded has the potential to be disrupted. So communicate with their staff and their team and ensure that they are aware that one of their district projects is a victim of these federal funding pauses, these freezes, these disruptions, et cetera, as this dust always continues to settle again. And then an exercise that I think is really, really valuable for every single person in this room, be it an existing project or one that's shortly coming down the pipe, is to look back at the materials that you've all developed up to this point and reassess for language that we know this administration is going to respond to. As we got very used to talking about infrastructure in a certain way over the course of the Biden-Harris administration, with a focus on certain types of people, certain types of focus areas, we have to do that again. And it is my belief, it is AFA's belief, that there are very easy, subtle changes that applications can make to do the same project with just a different lens put over it that will resonate with this administration. So go back to those materials now, start rewriting them. And for those of you that have grants in place or grant agreements even in place, you might be asked for supplemental material from the agencies to validate that this investment is still worthwhile in this administration. So just do the pre-work now. I know your staff capacity is very limited, but I really recommend doing that pre-work now so that when the federal agency reps are hired on and do start communicating with you, you have that material ready to go, can expedite a little bit faster. And then, as I mentioned at the very top, start to familiarize yourself with the Build America Bureau and the programs that they have. They do have technical assistance programs at the Bureau that are still active to get you prepped, ready, and knowledgeable about some of those larger financing and loan programs they have, but specifically TIFIA and RIF. TIFIA is Transportation Infrastructure Financing Program, and then RIF is dedicated to rail financing. So look at those programs. The TA program that helps you get TIFIA ready is the Innovative Finance and Asset Concession Grant Program, really helping you to look at all the assets you have locally and how those can be leveraged for a larger federal loan program. The runway of these programs is quite long. So I want to, the faster you start familiarizing yourself now and see if you can, if your projects are TIFIA applicable, the better, because it could be a couple of years before a loan is finalized. Yeah. Okay, I've talked quite a bit. So we're going to shift gears a little bit now and go over to the economic development side of things and hear from my colleague, AJ Herman. So I'll kick it over to AJ.
Thanks, Ross. Good to be with everyone today. I'll try to be quick because I know we've been going a little long. And just for everyone's awareness, I'm our Director of Policy and Program Innovation based in Kansas City, so just down the road from Omaha. I have some experience in city government, was policy director for current Kansas City Mayor Quentin Lucas, who's also the co-chair of our advisory council. I focus mostly on economic and community development and housing at AFA, though obviously work closely with Ross. And one of the things we always stress here is that infrastructure and community and economic development are closely related to each other. That's why we talk about them with mayors. You can't do community and economic development without infrastructure and vice versa. So broadly, I'll just reiterate everything that Ross says and reemphasize it. If you have a currently signed federal grant related to community and economic development, you are probably safe with maybe some delays in how funds are being dispersed, though if you have one that is not signed, that's something where, just communicate with your federal grant officers and program staff to see about what's going on. Noteworthy just in general, historically and in the current day, there just is not a lot of discretionary grants that go into community and economic development. The federal federal government has traditionally left that up to communities with a few small exceptions. And a lot of the grants that do come, programs like the Community Development Block Grant program from HUD or the workforce development funding that comes through the workforce system and goes through every workforce board, those tend to be more formula programs. And so that funding should continue to flow, though I'm going to talk a little bit about some exceptions there. On a high level, I will say, and this is not about the continuing resolution that just passed the House, so this year should be safe, but the proposed House budget, which passed about a month ago, that is still being considered, we don't know what's going to happen with it. That does include major spending cuts to all non-defense federal agencies. The way that bill is structured is that there's been targets made for cuts for each House committee. That includes programs I know are important for Nebraska and Iowa, like agriculture, financial services, a number of others. If that bill passes, which is still to be clear, the Senate has an alternative one that does not include as many Senate cuts. But if that ends up being the parameters with the bills, there could be some significant, and we're talking 20, 30, 40, 50% cuts to federal programs in those things starting next federal fiscal year. So I just want to stress that is something to monitor. That's going to particularly impact programs that support economic development and community development like CDBG, WIOA funding, and SNAP. That bill has not passed yet, but it's just something to monitor and be aware of as you're thinking about long-term planning. The Senate bill that's an alternative to that, it does hold funding a lot more steady. It decreases it a little bit, but again, none of those things have passed yet. The other thing I'll note is that, as Ross mentioned, the TCJA, the tax bill that passed under the first Trump administration, is up for reauthorization this year because the bill will expire at the end of this year if nothing is done. Generally, we see similar to what happened in infrastructure. We think this administration is going to focus more on tax incentives to incentivize economic development and workforce, things like opportunity zones, which were part of the first tax bill. What that exactly looks like, we don't know, but that's just something to really monitor because those tools do have a lot of uses, potential uses for economic and community development, and also could impact programs like LIHTC, the low-income housing tax credit, the new market tax credit program, and a number of other things. Ross, next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit of specific impacts on housing. I will note that the CR passed by the House yesterday does include a 50% cut to HUD's Community Development Fund, which funds CDBG and a number of other HUD programs that have been used for housing and broader community development. My current understanding of it is that most of that will impact discretionary funding that is awarded through earmarks. Though there are potential impacts to CDBG formula funds as well. So that is something to monitor, that there's CDBG funds, which are, as I think Mike mentioned at the top of this meeting, are being used to fund some important local projects, that those are potentially going to be cut going forward, which may impact local funding availability and projects. The CR does slightly increase funding for other major HUD programs, but it's not enough to keep up with increasing demand, as we've seen a lot of housing costs have escalated. So even though there's a slight increase, for example, for the allocation for housing choice vouchers, the housing choice voucher program is likely that will actually result in a net reduction in the total number of vouchers available nationwide because the cost of actually providing vouchers has gone up as housing costs have gone up. There are similar issues with PHA, which is Public Housing Authority spending that often supports a lot of other housing developments, as well as funding that goes to community of cares for homelessness support, which Omaha has one as the most major metros in the country. So again, maybe slight cuts to those programs, or sorry, slight increases to those programs, but not enough to keep up with demand is sort of the theme for this year, and then going forward, potentially drastic cuts to all those programs. Though again, we don't know where the long-term spending path is going to go. Like Ross mentioned, obviously there's talk of major federal cuts at HUD. Whether those will materialize or not, we don't know, and what the impacts of those be, we don't know. But that may also impact programs like the FHA, single-family mortgage insurance. Our general assumption now is that it may slow processing of, for example, FHA loans or grant disbursements, but we're hoping that at least the funding that's been awarded will stay steady. And then again, just noting life tech and opportunity zones are both obviously important for affordable housing. That will probably come through the tax bill that will be Congress will likely deliberate on later this year. So pay attention to that. Next slide. So broad summary of 10, scale of cuts very TBD. I'll just note that economic and community development programs are already greatly oversubscribed. Every city in the country that gets CDBG funds has way more applicants and potential uses for them than they actually have funds to give out, and that trend is probably only going to get worse. Federally funded benefit programs are very likely to be scaled back, at least in some form, though we don't know the extent to that. Again, if CR is passed in its current form by the Senate, cuts probably won't be felt as hard until next fiscal year. But at least given the parameters of what's in the Senate and House bill, cuts likely will be coming next federal fiscal year. And then finally, I'll just say additional devolution to state and local is likely, as Ross mentioned, and then incentives in the tax bill may become very, very important for community and economic development. So really monitor that, and we may have to rethink how some of those programs are working and how those projects get financed, given some of the changes that are coming. And with that, I will throw it back to Russ. Thank you. You're on mute, Russ.
Thank you. Really, that is it for us. I'm happy to take some questions in the next couple of minutes. I know that we're coming up at the tail end of your portion at lunch, and you might want to get back to talking to each other versus a couple folks on the screen, but happy to take a couple questions. If not, we've been Ross and AJ, and thanks so much.
Thank you guys, we appreciate it. It's certainly a timely topic. I think it's a tumultuous time for anyone who is working with the federal government, and we all do. So probably some more questions than answers, but that was an informative look into what's happening nationally. And I know we talked about local concerns. I'm very concerned about climate and housing and transportation funding and potential impacts along those lines. Mike and I were talking afterwards about a project in my district that could benefit from Vision Zero strategies. The city of Omaha just adopted the Vision Zero plan that we're looking to implement. And Omaha actually had the highest level of fatalities in over 10 years in our city. So it'd be very concerning to me if those kind of things are moving forward. Any questions for Ross or AJ from the group? Also asked Mike while we were sitting there during the presentation, I said, hey, does MAPA have any direct concerns about some of this federal funding? And you want to answer that question? Sure.
So at present, some of the longer term issues are things that we're hearing kind of most clarity on, where AJ and Ross highlighted some of those future potential cuts to programs, particularly formula programs. At present, we were the recipient of 2 awards at the tail end of the Biden-Harris administration. One of them is a project we call TRIPS, the Transformative Regional Investment Priority System. Yeah, it's about prioritizing transportation. It really builds in kind of our partnership with our local communities, with the NDOT folks, and really trying to get out ahead of understanding where we can partner with the federal government on any of those projects, and really kind of almost an addendum to our metro travel improvement study, but also looking at how do we really kind of set ourselves up to be really kind of first in the queue for a lot of these state funds that help support projects across the state as well. And the second project was a Reconnecting Communities project. So that is looking at the North Freeway in Omaha, really working with the city of Omaha, working with NDOT, working with other partners in the neighborhood to think about all of the investment that's happening along 30th Street, all of the investment that's happening around 24th Street. How do we consider that corridor in the context of what is hundreds of millions of dollars of new development, new consideration of those corridors, and thinking about that piece of infrastructure, both in terms of its history and in terms of its future, as really kind of being this area that can reconnect both sides of those developments. So Both of those projects has about $3.5 million worth of federal funds that we haven't received any clarity on yet. Those are kind of the two most specific things that we've seen. The longer term cuts to CDBG, changes in how the infrastructure bill allocates funding, fewer discretionary grant opportunities. Those are all things that we would definitely do.
Thank you. Any last comments or questions for Ross and AJ in the group? Yeah, we have one here. Meredith?
I just have a question about the way that, funding was kind of redistributed at regional partner level on the IIJA, and whether or not you see those regional, grant makers back to whether that's federal or state funding. They set up a lot of systems to get out of the knowledge. So, hey, you're very well. Think you'll either have to repeat or give her the mic.
I'll go to the microphone so you guys can hear that question better.
I missed the tail end of that question. Okay, great. We're handing the mic. Awesome.
Thanks. I just wondered, through the IIJA, there was a lot of regional partners that were set up across the country to distribute federal grant dollars, and I'm wondering if you're seeing in that shift back to state formula funding, whether or not those regional partners that have been set up for the last 4 years, if you see that going away.
I think through the current programming, as of right now, any projects that are moving forward or have been given authority to those regional partners to administer those dollars, I think those likely will maintain, barring any disruptions to funding flowing from the agencies generally. It is in that service transportation reauthorization process where I think that those changes are really going to come to fruition as far as the shifts back to a state model. So I think until there is a service transportation reauthorization bill on the floor that is actually being deliberated and voted on, you're good. The IIJA lasts through, I believe, September of 2026. It was a 5-year bill. So those programs should move as they were intended to move, again, barring the secretary or the agency of the jurisdiction saying we're not going to prioritize that funding and maybe slowing the NOFOs or changing language of the NOFOs as such that they can work around some of those, the way the programs were originally established through the legislation. I can't speak to that. It'd be all speculation, so I don't want to. But that's a good flag for me to follow up on. I will say one other thing with Inflation Reduction Act funding, the IRA funding, there are some of those regional partners that were in charge of distributing funds and dollars specific to the greenhouse gas reduction fund programs. Those coffers have been completely frozen because they're administered through Citibank and they're part of a larger Federal Bureau of investigation. So if regional partners to that level, I think there's going to be a significant halt to the programs as they're being administered there. I don't think anything even to remotely like that's happened with IIJA regional partnerships, however.
Thank you. Anything else from the group? One more? What are you hearing about the Department of Energy loan program office and any of the loans that were being used to fund in particular biofuels or biomanufacturing programs around the country? A lot of that, I think, was maybe officially or unofficially tied to the Inflation Reduction Act, but are those being put on pause, or do you see free flow of capital?
That is a phenomenal question. Specific to the LPO office, I do not. They've been pretty quiet. I don't know the staffing extent that's happened at the LPO. AJ, I'm not sure if you do, but projects at scale, such as like hydrogen hub programs, I know that they're being significantly impacted by our IRA programmatic freezes. AJ, do you have any other insights to offer?
I do know that a couple of grants, that there was actually one in mid-February for, loans around, specifically, I think around biofuels, sustainable aviation fuel was awarded in February. So I think that from the loan program office, so I think to Montana, I believe. So I think the short answer is that some of them, it's not going to be eliminated entirely, at least barring legislative changes. And some of the programs they're probably, like a lot of things with the administration, there may be increased scrutiny on certain categories of programs under that. If you have a signed agreement, it is likely safe-ish. If you are in the process of trying to create a new agreement, that's sort of TBD, but it does look like they have at least launched a couple of new agreements from the loan program office, and one of which was about biofuels. So again, something probably to Ross's earlier point, make sure you talk to your representatives to let them know how important that program is for potential projects locally, and make sure they're talking to the right folks at Department of Energy to let them know that program is very important.
Any other questions? Ross and AJ, I also work in healthcare, so can you also make sure they don't get Medicaid at the same time? Just kidding.
Heard. We'll do what we can.
All right, I don't think there's any more questions from the group. We appreciate your insights. Thanks for having your presenters today.
Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your time together.
Thanks, everyone.
Let's give them a hand. All right, it's almost 12:30. I always like to keep us on time. I just will give an opportunity for everyone in the audience if they have any announcements for the group or anything they want this group to know about going forward before our next meeting. I don't think I see any. With that, I'll just say, speaking of March Madness, Sunday's a big day. We'll have matchup announcements for both Creighton and University of Nebraska Omaha for the first time in its history this year. So, for Blue Jays and members. Thank you all. We'll see you at the next meeting in June.